I had just poured my first cup of coffee on the porch when the sound of engines cut through the quiet. 3 SUVs rolled up my gravel drive with flashing amber lights like some kind of budget police raid, and for a split second I froze. A woman in a blazer, hair in a tight bun, jumped out waving a clipboard like it was a badge. She pointed at me and yelled, "Get off this property right now. You don't belong here." And here's the thing. That cabin porch she was marching up on, the one she acted like she owned, that was my family's cabin. I had inherited it 3 weeks earlier. My coffee was still hot in my hand, and suddenly I was face to face with the strangest welcome committee I'd ever seen. Now, I'm not new to difficult neighbors, but this was on a different level. The woman introduced herself as Sharon Keller, chair of the Maplewood Bluffs Homeowners Association, and behind her stood a guy in a reflective vest fiddling with what looked like a shiny badge. Sharon announced they were here to conduct a compliance inspection because of reports of unauthorized occupation. She said it's so sharp and official, I almost laughed, except the guy was already stringing caution tape across my trees like we were in the middle of a crime scene. Unauthorized occupation? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. This is my place. I inherited it from my uncle 3 weeks ago. You don't have any right to be here. But Sharon didn't flinch. She waved the clipboard closer to my face, telling me her volunteer inspector had full authority over any property in the subdivision. That's when I noticed something that really pushed my blood pressure. Right on my boundary marker, a sign had been bolted in, "Reserve parking, chairwoman only," on my property. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The inspector fidgeted with his vest, eyes darting, clearly not ready for someone to ask him for credentials. Sharon tried to block my camera with her clipboard, snapping that the sign had been there for months and this area fell under their jurisdiction. But her voice lost just a little bit of that bossy edge when I pressed harder. Then, like some kind of scene from a movie, my neighbor a quarter mile down the road pulled up in her pickup. Her name's Linda, the type who waves at everyone and notices everything. She leaned out the window and shouted, "What's going on here? What's with the flashing lights?" I told her what they were claiming, and I saw the recognition on her face, like she'd heard this song before. She waved a crumpled receipt at me and muttered about weird HOA charges for landscaping patrols and compliance equipment. The so-called inspector finished his walk around, muttered into his radio, and Sharon handed me a document that looked official until you actually read the nonsense on it. Then they left in a swirl of amber lights, but I had this sick feeling it wasn't over. Sure enough, 2 hours later, when the moving truck showed up with the rest of my stuff, one of their SUVs was parked sideways across my driveway, blocking us in. No one inside, just sitting there like a barricade. And I swear, behind the oak trees, maybe 60 yards out, I caught sight of Sharon trying to hide while keeping her eyes on me. Every time I moved across the property, she shifted. It was like a bad spy thriller, except it was happening on land that legally belonged to me. That night, I decided to take a closer look around. Near the back of the property was an old pump house I'd barely paid attention to. Inside a wooden box, I found a set of rusty keys that had clearly been there for years. One of them fit the padlock on the pump house. And when I got inside, it was bigger than I thought. Pipes, wiring, all maintained way too recently considering my uncle had been in assisted living the last 2 years. And in the back, a filing cabinet full of documents with county seals and lease agreements. Turns out the pump house and the mailbox cluster weren't owned by the HOA at all. They were leased from my uncle and now by default for me. And the signature on those agreements? Sharon Keller. Monthly rent payments, automatic renewals, and all of it hidden from the neighbors who thought they were paying for shared facilities. No wonder Sharon had been circling me like a hawk. She wasn't protecting community safety. She was protecting her little empire. I photographed everything. And when I stepped back outside, I heard the faint buzz of a radio. Someone whispering, "Keep watching him document everything he touches." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just HOA nonsense anymore. This was coordinated surveillance. The next day, Linda called me. She admitted she'd been suspicious for months while helping with HOA finances. There were charges that didn't make sense. Thousands of dollars for compliance patrol equipment, radios, certification programs that never existed. She wanted to know if I found anything on my land that explained those expenses. I told her about the lease documents. Right then, I realized we had allies, because if you want to take on people abusing power, you can't do it alone. So I let things play out. At the next impromptu community gathering of the mailboxes, I walked right into the crowd while Sharon was giving one of her speeches about neighborhood standards. I sat down on the bench my uncle had installed years ago and said, "Well, since we're meeting on my property, I'd like to hear what these concerns are." You could feel the shift in the air. The word "my" landed like a stone in a pond. Questions started flying. Wait, the inspector isn't certified? Then what are we paying for? Why are there $2,500 charges for equipment we never approved? Sharon tried to smile her way through it, claiming it was all necessary for community safety. But the cracks were showing. Linda pulled out spreadsheets. Another neighbor, Greg, mentioned recording strange radio chatter about enforcement protocols. The perfect storm was brewing, and I wasn't about to waste it. I called the county sheriff's office and asked for a deputy who specialized in property disputes. When Deputy Harris showed up, full uniform, badge, the real deal, I set the stage. I pretended to be measuring the pump house for repairs, clipboard in hand, making sure Sharon and her volunteers saw me. Within minutes, they rolled up with strobes flashing, Derek the volunteer barking orders like he was in charge. "Sir, this area is under HOA jurisdiction. You need to stop and submit to a compliance review." He flashed his fake badge right in my face. That's when Deputy Harris stepped forward and calmly said, "I'm Deputy Harris with the county sheriff's office. May I see your credentials?" I wish you could have seen Derek's face. The color drained instantly. He fumbled with his badge, stammered about being a certified compliance volunteer. Harris didn't buy it for a second. "Impersonating law enforcement is a serious offense," he told him, voice steady but sharp. Sharon tried to backpedal, saying it was a misunderstanding, but it was too late. Linda pulled out her financial records. Greg chimed in with his recordings, and Harris wrote everything down while neighbors crowded around, eyes wide. That was the day the play acting ended. 2 days later, Linda pinned a financial breakdown on the bulletin board at the local feed store, the place everyone in the county stopped for gossip. It spread faster than wildfire. Over $6,000 in unauthorized spending exposed in color-coded spreadsheets. The community was furious. Sharon showed up looking like she hadn't slept in days, mumbling that it was private financial business, but nobody was buying it anymore. I filed official notice demanding removal of all HOA equipment and termination of their lease on my land. Deputy Harris's report backed me up. I thought Sharon might lash out again, but instead she called me in tears, voice shaking, begging to resolve things quietly. She admitted the HOA was drowning in debt, that she'd faked the compliance program to cover it up. She said Derek got carried away with the power, but really she was just trying not to lose her home. And I'll admit, for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the barricaded SUV, the fake badges, the intimidation. Desperation explains bad choices, sure, but it doesn't excuse them. On the third morning, the whole neighborhood gathered at the mailbox cluster. Harris stood by the property marker with his map, confirming once and for all the land was mine. I held up the recordings and documents. The patrol program and these facilities were never legitimate HOA projects. They were on my private land, disguised as community property. You've all been paying for something that didn't exist. The crowd erupted. People shouted about refunds, about betrayal, about removing Sharon. I walked over, pulled down the chairwoman reserve sign, and revealed the original one my uncle had left underneath. Visitor parking only. The look on Sharon's face when she realized even her parking space had been fake. It was like watching a balloon deflate. Linda called for an emergency board meeting. Voices rose in agreement, and Harris made it official. The compliance patrol was disbanded, impersonation of law enforcement would be prosecuted, and all HOA equipment had to be removed from my land within 24 hours. Derek stared at the ground, clutching his useless badge. Sharon stood silent. No more speeches left in her. By the time I walked back to my cabin, the tension that had hung over the place since the day I moved and was finally gone. The meadows stretched out quiet, the pump house just a pump house again, and for the first time it felt like the land was truly mine. Last week they sent fake cops to push me off my porch. This week, with the law and the community on my side, I pushed back. Turns out, real authority beats theater every single time. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Bullies only win when everyone lets them play the part unchecked. So what do you think? Was Sharon just desperate and in over her head, or was she a manipulator who deserved everything coming to her? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA horror story or a neighbor who crossed the line, I want to hear it.